I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how people make those YouTube cover photos with like timetable without feeling like a total dork. But I'm feeling like a total dork. Hey, welcome back to the Commonplace. I'm Autumn. Heads up, I have a cold. But we are still gonna move forward because we are all kind of right on the cusp of the new school year. I'm sure that you are making resources. I'm sure that you were thinking about what you need in place before the formal school year begins. And so I want to talk about two resources that I've made, my timetable and my program weekly list, I guess is what you would call it. It's my breakdown by each week, what needs to be done per subject. I'm actually going to be including these resources over my Patreon, which you should totally check out. The link is below. It's $7 a month, which is like a fancy coffee. My timetable template will be there. I'm gonna have it filled out. You can see it. Timetables are pretty movable. I've made this. I've been using one for years, and so this is just now our formal lesson one, and I'll have that all filled out, so that'll be available. But then for the weekly breakdown, I'm just going to include a single subject so you can see sort of how I did it. This will be a subject that is common to Charlotte Mason curricula across the board. Otherwise, it will be blank because I want to protect the CMEC's hard work. That is my curriculum option. I will also link about them below. I have another video talking about why we chose the CMEC. I love the CMEC, and I want to make sure that I protect all of their hard work, so I'm going to keep that one blank. Just a heads up in case you were expecting something else when you get in there. What is a timetable? A timetable is a very fancy Mason word. You totally know you're talking to someone who loves Charlotte Mason when they say things like timetable. It's our timetable. It's your daily schedule. That's what it is. It's your schedule for lessons. It's just a breakdown block by block, usually in 10 or 20-minute increments for younger years. And it just tells you what you're supposed to be doing when. It gives you kind of like a general guide and framework to your day. What you would do is you would take something like your entire program guide, something that tells you what you need to do for an entire term, then you would break it down by week and then use that weekly breakdown to figure out what to do per day each week. Now I want to be careful here, because I think there's a temptation with homeschool moms, with moms in general, with people in general, to take something that is supposed to be a helpful framework and to turn it into an exact system. Now, whenever I talk about this sort of thing, I think it's really important to get a very helpful principle under your belt, which is that you will never systematize your timetable or your weekly breakdown to a point where you and your children will not be sinners, or that just general things in life won't happen. It just doesn't work like that. I love this poem by T.S. Eliot. I talk about this all the time in real life, so if you know me in real life, you've heard this, but hang with me. And I cannot remember the name of the poem. I should really look it up. I will try to remember to put it below. But basically it starts with, why do men love the church? There's the Google line you need. And as he works through and he talks about this, he gets to a line where he says that men are dreaming of systems so perfect that no one has to be good. And he continues on to talk about Christ, how we're a shadow of the man who is to come, who is himself goodness. Like Christ is good. He is our ideal type, if you are used to that classical education lingo. And we are supposed to be conforming ourselves to him, to the practices of his life, of his ways, of his nature. And no system, no timetable is going to make you good. You still have to learn to be good. Your children still have to learn to be good. Sanctification still needs to take place. And I think one perk of homeschooling is that you are face to face with that need all of the time. Your kids are not gone all the time. It's not easy to pretend you don't see it. It's not easy for them to hide it when they are with their families. And so while a timetable is so helpful and it will keep you on track and it'll give you sort of a touch point throughout the day, it'll hold everyone in the family, mother and child, accountable, it's not going to solve all of your problems. So before we even get into timetable, before we get into the program list, what I've done to prepare, how I'm going to use it in the fall, I just want to make sure that comes across, that we in our homes are growing in wisdom and virtue, and the timetable is to serve the family does not serve the timetable, because we can often make the family serve the schedule, ignoring the needs in front of us, ignoring the character moments in front of us, ignoring our own needs that need to be taken care of in real time, just to match the perfect schedule, when really the schedule is just supposed to help us. Keep that in mind as we are working through this. Okay, so the PNEU recommended that terms are usually between 10 and 11 weeks. Aim for 10, you get an extra buffer week, and then you have an exam week. This is true across Charlotte Mason curricula. You'll find this if you look at AO. I think they operate on a 30-week per year schedule as well. But that was the general idea. Now, in my pre-reading video, you saw the massive amount of books that I had in my arms. They were just overflowing, falling off, and I wasn't even holding all of them. You don't read all of those books in their full form. In fact, Mason usually scheduled between 6 and 10 chapters per term. So if you just do the quick math, you know that that's not even a whole chapter per week. And this gives us two very interesting points about the timetable and about the weekly breakdowns. So the first is that while your student needs to be reading and narrating, this is not the only way they learn. There's just too much time. Like in the time blocks, when you look at a timetable, you don't need as much time as you're given. And so I think that shows us something really interesting about our lessons. First, you do have the reading and narration, but then you need to fill a student's time with other worthwhile things like notebooking, being out of doors, going to visit farms or visit people who do certain things for work, spending time embodying, enjoying, and experiencing the things that they learn in books out in the real world, having real relationships with them. So Mason has this phrase that she says that children learn from things. Adults, we often learn from books or podcasts or YouTube videos or something like that, but we can engage with ideas totally just in our minds. Children are different when they learn. They actually need to engage with the things. This is why if you have an early years student and you've read some of Home Education and you see that point where Mason talks about how children should not be read to too much, and everything in your mind goes haywire because you're like, what? Don't read too much to a child. What she's saying in context is that you need to be spending more time out of doors forming relationships with real things than just reading about them. So for a child who lives near the sea, they need to go spend time at the sea, not just read a bunch of books about the sea. And she continues that idea in those early years that children need to learn from things. So we have ample time in our formal lesson time. We're not even talking about our free time, in our formal lesson time to go and engage with real things. It also connects with a larger classical idea, because I'm always trying to plug Mason into the larger classical stream, from St. Augustine in his book on Christian teaching. The very quick summary of this point is that he says that you cannot fully learn just from books. You have to have real life experience to make what you've read known deeply to you. So like, for a very fun dramatic example, if you read Romeo and Juliet, you can totally understand the storyline, right? Like you get the basic point. But if you've had like an angsty teenage love, and I'm not recommending angsty teenage loves, but if you've had one, you're gonna understand Romeo and Juliet a little bit differently and hopefully be more open to the wisdom being shared by Shakespeare, what you should be learning from Romeo and Juliet. But if you've never ever felt anything for another person, if you've never had that desire, if you've never struggled through family expectations and your own desires, then, you know, you're not gonna get maybe as much. Now, the second thing that this shows us, the 6 to 10 chapters per term, but having too much time for that, is that a mom has a lot of freedom. Like, we're not all doing the exact same thing. Our students are different, we are different, the things that need to happen in our home are different, and so you might look at something and say, okay, this is like what, half a chapter a week? Well, on the first block that week, I'm gonna do half a chapter, and on the second block that week, we're going to do an outside thing. Or we're gonna read the first chapter over 1 week, and then the second week we're going to use both our blocks to be outside. You can break it up a lot of different ways, and I think that's always encouraging to hear when someone pulls up a Mason timetable, when they start with a new curriculum, whatever it is, it feels very like, okay, I have to do it this exact way, plug this in, get the outcome. But that's just not how methods work. So you should be really encouraged that Mason gave a lot of room for moms to know their families and to love them well. Okay, so we're gonna move here a little bit into just general Mason principles for timetables, because I think they're helpful whether you have a formal student, whether you have 5 formal students. Timetables are great. I actually, in my Patreon, have our old timetable along with like an audio explanation for how we formed it, because I think timetables are so helpful. The first reason being that they hold mom and child accountable together. So particularly for formal lessons, I'm not sharing my whole my whole family, whole day timetable, but particularly for formal lessons, this is great for 2 reasons. One, if you have a dawdler, and Mason loves to talk about dawdlers. If you have a dawdler who just kind of like drags their feet and doesn't yet understand that there's a proper time to do a thing and a proper way to do it, timetables help, because they only have so much time to get something done. They don't have all afternoon to finish something or all morning to complete a lesson. It needs to be done by this time, and if not, then there will be a natural consequence of lost time later. They won't have their due free time after lessons. They're gonna get all messed up. That's the type of consequence that Mason really likes. The second thing is that if you have kind of the hopeless student, someone who maybe really struggles with math, math is the worst. When they look at the timetable, which should be posted in a place that everyone can see it, they know math ends in 10 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the day and the block, 20 minutes. I do not have to do this forever. And as someone who used to sit in classes that could be 70 to 90 minutes long in high school, that is really nice because you know the end is going to come, and therefore you can start working on training your will to pay attention, because the habit of attention is so very important in lessons. If you're going to learn anything, you must be able to command your attention. And guess what, Mom? You can't command your kids' attention. They have to learn to do it. So a short lesson allows for a child to practice that, to stay focused, to do their sums well, excuse me, whatever it is, and then continue on to the next thing with a renewed freshness because they finished math. And so then the next thing about timetables is that they should be created so that there's an alternation. Is alternation a word? Alternating. It should alternate so that the child comes to each new subject with a fresh mind and a fresh body. So if you know that your child, will kind of be bogged down between logic and Latin, you wouldn't necessarily put those back to back, right? Like you're going to alternate them maybe with poetry or recitation or literature, folktale, something that they maybe really enjoy and they find so exciting, and then go back to something that might be a little bit harder. You're also going to add in things like the Swedish drill, a time to stop and move their body. They're still working on body precision. They're still training their body just like they're training their mind. And if you don't know what Swedish drill is, let me please encourage you to go check out the Schoolyard. They're on Instagram. They're one of my primary resources for learning about drill. Drill is one of those weird things that when you come across it, everything in the Mason world is kind of new possibly, but then Swedish drill is very weird. You're like, how in the world do we do that? Schoolyard has you covered. Like when I looked at our timetable and I was working through what the CMEC had recommended as a base start to look at and figure out from, I just knew it was gonna be a lot for my daughter in her first formal year to just be going boom, 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 all the way through for 2.5 hours. So I, in our timetable, scheduled a 10-minute tea break. That's it. We're not doing it over lessons. It's not to make lessons fun and exciting. We are just both going to pause halfway through for a 10-minute tea, and then we're gonna go back to it. And of course, lastly, you keep them short, especially in the early years. Kids are learning their habit of attention. They are only able to command their attention as strong as their wills are at this point. And hot tip, if you have a child who struggles with things, they're not strong-willed, they're weak-willed. Mason would say you're learning to control your will like a muscle. And just like you train a muscle over time, that's what you're doing with your students. And so you start with very short lessons intentionally because that helps in that endeavor as well. Now here is exactly what I did. We're gonna talk about all the practical stuff. Again, remember you can find these things over in Patreon. And this is how I got ready for this year. So I took everything from the program guide and I just divided it by 10. I knew I wanted to be able to do everything in 10 weeks so that we had that buffer week before exam week, and that's the basic math of it. I do want to say that CMEC does offer breakdowns for certain subjects, not all subjects. When I found one in the guide, it was always a happy surprise. Like, oh, great, they've already broken this one down for me. I can see how they've done it and continue to learn from their form. So I want to make sure you know they don't do it for everything, but that is in there for some of the guides, and it's an excellent resource, and I'm still gonna be trying to encourage you towards the CMEC. But when I broke it down by 10 weeks, that's when I made my template for my program weekly list. And I just went in and I plugged in what should be done in each week. Now, I did this rather than doing a day by day, which was my original idea, was to go through and just figure out daily schedules for the entire term. It would have been so much work, and I probably wouldn't have used it. Aren't I glad I did not do that? Here's why I did the weekly breakdown, because I realized that it gave me a full high-level view of my entire term, which I wanted. Everything's on that spreadsheet. I should not forget about anything because it's all right there. But I don't exactly know how this first term is going to go. I've said this a lot, I've said it in real life a lot. This first term, we're gonna learn and be humbled and grow together. We'll see how my daughter does, we'll see how I do, we'll change things up if we need to. But each week, my plan is to sit down on Sunday night, review what I have on my weekly list, what needs to be covered, and then put it in day by day of what I expect to happen. And then when I get to my logbook, which if you're confused about logbooks, there's a video coming as well. When I get to it each day, we'll make notes of where we deviated from that expected timetable. If my daughter, I find out, actually can't do that much in 10 minutes or in 20 minutes, whatever it is, I am then in the perfect position to change my weekly timetable for the rest of the term. I'll just go through on Google Drive and switch it through. But I am able to change things in accordance to how she's learning and what she's doing while keeping a complete view of what is expected to be done for our term and figure out how to still make that work. And I think that's going to be very helpful and very important because she is not the same as every other child. I have 3 children. They're all going to be a little bit different. And we're not trying to systematize this to where everyone has to do something on this day and then we just move on whether or not we've understood it. That's why this is so great. Now, secondly, when I sit down on that Sunday night, part of my plan is to go through my pre-reading notebook, read through any of my notes that I'm going to need for that week, make any notes that I might need to prepare my daughter for before we reach a subject. So if we're reading something and there's a concept or vocabulary she's not going to understand, go ahead and explain that to her. Make all those tiny little notes just so I'm not doing that on the fly. The timetable, it's tight. I mean, you have 10 minutes sometimes for a lesson. I don't want to be wasting that time because I'm not prepared, right? So that's kind of my Sunday night activity, I expect. I'll then look through any CMEC materials that we have. They have amazing guides for like brushwork, chalk drawing, things like that. I'll go through, review any videos about instruction, reminders about narration, things like that, as we continue to go through this first term, and I'm just kind of learning in real time. And then plan the rest of the family week, because I also have those responsibilities too. Things like, what appointments do we have? When are we gonna go to the grocery store? Are we seeing any friends? What are we doing with church? Things like that. And from there, we'll just take it week by week. But I think I'll be able to do that relatively easily because we have these two things in place. Okay, so if you've not noticed, I love to plan things. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a type A person. I think my husband would like snort chuckle in the background if he heard me say I was type A. Not really. Like, well done is better than super perfect for me. But I love to plan and organize so that as a mom, I can meet and anticipate needs and take care of many things. Moms are running a lot of stuff, and not in a pitying way at all. It's actually the job. It's a wonderful role in the home, and it's very needed. And so I like organizing type of stuff. If you would like to know more about that type of stuff, because there's a lot going on in the world for most homeschool moms. For me over here, how I'm introducing formal lessons amidst running our home. I have two younger sons. I run my business. I do all of my Commonplace stuff. This is all my fun stuff. How we kind of organize all that, keep that moving. Let me know if that would be helpful, those sorts of timetables, those sorts of resources. And I'm just enjoying having you here. Thanks for coming along. I'll continue to share. We've got a lot of videos coming up about this formal year, this planning, this stuff, right before we roll into our actual start of the year, which for us will be the second week of September. So, gonna say it. Like this video, subscribe, so you just don't miss it, because I am working hard on this stuff in order to hopefully be helpful to other people. I would love to have you come over to the podcast, which is where we get into Mason, into the classical tradition in a much deeper way. We apply it to our real lives, but we're also gonna make sure we are fully armed with our philosophy and our pedagogy, because otherwise, without it, you're kind of like a ship at sea without an anchor. It's hard to know which direction you're going when you're seeing new things on Instagram and on the internet all the time if you're not fully rooted in your philosophy. And I really want to help moms get rooted there. So stick around, I'll be back. I'm enjoying talking about this in real time, and I hope you have a great time prepping this week.